They call it a blockade, but this is not just a military move in a narrow stretch of water. This is the moment one choke point, one standoff, and one presidential gamble could hit the entire world economy. Because when Hormuz stops moving, oil does not just get expensive. Trade, shipping, inflation, and alliances start shaking. Tonight, we go inside the Hormuz Blockade, the hidden system behind Trump's Iran standoff, and what breaks next. The world's most dangerous waterway is suddenly the center of a superpower gamble with global consequences. Hormuz looks tiny on a map, but its scale in the real economy is enormous. When movement slows here, the shock travels far beyond the Gulf and far beyond oil. This narrow channel connects tankers, traders, refineries, airlines, factories, and consumers across multiple continents. About 1/5 of global oil and gas moves through this corridor, making every disruption instantly international. And now, stillness itself has become a warning sign the markets cannot ignore. Trump's standoff with Iran is no longer just diplomatic theater or military signaling. It is a direct contest over leverage, deterrence, shipping control, and political endurance. The headlines speak of ceasefires, talks, and pressure, but the system underneath remains unstable. To understand the danger, we have to start with the choke point itself. Since late February, the war has pushed the Gulf into a permanently elevated state of risk. As strikes spread and trust collapsed, Hormuz became the pressure valve everyone was watching. Then Trump escalated again, announcing a blockade tied directly to the Iranian confrontation. Reuters reported more than a dozen U.S. warships were involved in enforcing that pressure. The message was clear. Washington was prepared to squeeze Tehran from the sea outward. But this was not a total closure of the entire strait. The blockade targeted ships going to or from Iranian ports, changing the legal and strategic picture. In its first day, 6 merchant vessels reportedly turned back rather than test the line. Yet the blockade did not fully stop all traffic through Hormuz itself. At least 8 ships still crossed, showing how messy partial chokeholds can become. That distinction matters because a port blockade is not the same as shutting the strait. But in markets, perception can hit almost as hard as physical interruption. Insurance spikes, routing decisions change, and shipping companies start waiting for legal clarity. Every uncertain endpoint becomes a potential trigger for wider disruption. At sea, this is a contest of maps, permissions, surveillance, and nerves. On land, it becomes a political demonstration of who can impose real costs faster. That is why Hormuz is more than geography. It is leverage compressed into water. China watches because it buys large volumes of Iranian and Gulf energy. Europe watches because refinery stress, freight costs, and inflation can return quickly. And Asia watches hardest because its exposure to Middle Eastern supply remains profound. The oil market reacted exactly the way stressed systems usually do, violently, then nervously. Prices dipped below $100 on talk of diplomacy, not on restored certainty. That difference is crucial because hope is not the same thing as recovery.
Brent forecast raised 22% to $96 per barrel.
That is not a crisis already over. It is a risk premium made official. Gasoline was projected to peak around $4.30 in April. Diesel looked worse, with an April average peak near $5.80. Diesel matters because it moves trucking, industry, agriculture, shipping, and much of modern logistics. So the energy shock spreads through supply chains long before most consumers understand why. Oil is never just oil once the transport system begins pricing fear. The EIA warned that even reopening Hormuz would not bring immediate relief. Full restoration of flows could take months, not days or even weeks. Backlogs, damaged infrastructure, uncertainty, and output delays would keep prices elevated. In other words, reopening the gate does not instantly repair the machine behind it. Shipping companies understood that long before politicians started promising quick normalization. Major operators said ceasefire headlines created possibilities, but not full maritime certainty. Others waited to see whether the truce would hold before accepting business again. One tanker executive told Reuters, "I want to see the fine print." That sentence captures the entire problem. Trade restarts only when confidence actually returns, and confidence is often the last thing restored after a chokepoint crisis. Reuters also cited almost 30 maritime incidents involving vessels and offshore infrastructure since late February. That is enough to turn every transit decision into a live risk calculation. Meanwhile, the Gulf remained packed with cargo waiting for safer passage windows. Kepler counted 187 laden tankers carrying 172 million barrels inside. Those numbers show how quickly a queue becomes a global pressure multiplier. Asian refiners were especially eager for any signal that Gulf loading might resume. But eagerness is not certainty, and certainty is what the market was missing. Routes may reopen in fragments, while the larger commercial rhythm stays broken. A technically open corridor can still behave like a crisis zone. That is why post-blockade recovery is always slower than the first political announcement. Then came the second shock. Trump's move began straining the Western alliance itself. Britain and France refused to join the Iranian port blockade, despite heavy pressure. Their refusal turned Hormuz from an energy crisis into a NATO cohesion test. European leaders said they would not be dragged directly into the conflict. Instead, they proposed a future defensive mission only after hostilities truly end. That mission would restore navigation, not participate in America's blockade strategy. Timing mattered because Europe wanted diplomacy first, force later, and only defensively. Trump, by contrast, was already using the strait as immediate leverage. So the alliance found itself split between deterrence, caution, and political distance. And once alliances start diverging publicly, adversaries notice. Behind the naval drama, another track kept moving quietly: diplomacy through Pakistan. Reuters reported a two-stage framework built around ceasefire first and broader settlement second. In that plan, an immediate ceasefire could reopen Hormuz right away. Then 15 to 20 days of talks would chase a final agreement. That larger deal was expected to include nuclear curbs and sanctions relief. It was even tentatively labeled the Islamabad Accord. But Iran was not looking for a temporary pause without deeper guarantees. Tehran emphasized a permanent ceasefire and protection against future attacks. The United States wanted long-term suspension of nuclear activity and removal of enriched material. Iran reportedly floated something much shorter, 3 to 5 years. That gap is not a detail, it is the heart of the standoff. If the two sides disagree on years, verification, and sanctions, leverage stays alive. So talks reopen, collapse, restart, and collapse again without truly ending the crisis. Sanctions remain bargaining chips that Washington cannot remove on promise alone. Nuclear material remains a security issue neither side trusts the other to manage. Domestic politics deepen the difficulty on both sides of the table. In America, rising fuel costs turn strategy into a pocketbook problem for voters. In Iran, damage, sanctions, and national pride all limit negotiating space. China's condemnation of the blockade adds another layer to the geopolitical contest. This is why the standoff remains simultaneously military, economic, diplomatic, and psychological. The IMF then pushed the stakes even higher with its growth warning. If the conflict worsens and oil stays above 100 into 2027, recession risk rises sharply. The IEA also cut supply and demand growth expectations as conflict distorted normal market assumptions.
Demand growth cut to 600,000 operating cell days.
That was half the previous forecast, a dramatic sign of spreading economic damage. Asia would feel the pain first because it depends most on Middle Eastern crude. But nobody stays insulated once transport fuel starts infecting the wider cost structure. Food, fertilizer, plastics, aviation, trucking, and industry all inherit the shock. Central banks fear inflation, traders fear scarcity, and households feel the squeeze last. That is how a maritime standoff becomes a system-wide economic event. From here, the future branches into four dangerous but very different paths. One path is diplomacy, inspections, sanctions bargaining, and a slower return of shipping confidence. Another is prolonged blockade, where costs keep rising even without spectacular battlefield escalation. A third is wider war, pulling in Lebanon, shipping lanes, and already stressed alliances. The fourth is unstable truce, where passage resumes only through permissions, hedges, and fear. That last scenario may be the most deceptive because it looks calmer than it feels. Even now, other regional fronts remain active outside the formal ceasefire frame. So the map never truly returns to peace, only to layered uncertainty. Every tanker movement becomes a signal, every delay a warning, every price move a vote. And every government must decide whether Hormuz is a temporary crisis or a structural turning point. Trump sees leverage, Iran sees pressure, markets see vulnerability, allies see risk they cannot control. That is what makes this blockade bigger than a naval maneuver in disputed waters. If Hormuz becomes permanent leverage, the whole world economy pays for one unresolved standoff.